Flowing through stressful times. A number of years ago, I had an epic time in my life for stress, and it taught me a lot about how to deal with times that challenge us in the extreme. It involved a house that we just moved into and had built, and 2 weeks later, waking up to find 4 feet of water around us. And for the next 3 years, fighting not one, but multiple legal battles and having to become something of like a legal secretary to learn the law, to understand the ins and outs of hydrology and how something like this could happen, to look at building regulations and to understand what are the guidelines in relation to that, and to learn insurance law and what the law in general could do to support us or not. It was a pretty tough time, and it included taking my kids out of school for a few years and home educating them due to some issues with the local education system. So there were a lot of things happening at once. And I remember during that time that I used to wake up in the morning, and before I'd even open my eyes, before I'd hardly become conscious, my head was already racing with kind of what I call damage limitation, your mind's override switch, whereby it's trying desperately to run all the things that you should keep on top of to manage your life. And it's actually a counterproductive thing because, of course, rest is more important than anything else. Time to unwind, time to recenter, etc. But, I had some lessons to learn. And during that time, I picked up a number of things that I think are beneficial that I'd like to share with you. So one of the first things that might help is that I noticed that when we moved into that house and then we were flooded and all of a sudden we had a lot of problems to deal with, it seemed like. It was a new community and I didn't know anyone at that time. And I remember feeling incredibly isolated. And, it was a small hamlet in rural Scotland. And Scotland is a pretty friendly country, to be honest with you. I've made lifelong friends there and still consider it to be a home. But I found that when we came into this community, that although people were friendly in terms of just waving and saying hello as they passed, I found it really difficult to kind of get a little bit deeper. And I know I was coming from a place of some desperation at that time, of some need. And so I remember thinking, would it kill them to even just, invite me over for a coffee as people would pass? We were in a fairly central location that people passed quite frequently. And, it's only in retrospect that I've understood something, that coming from the place of pure need as I was and a certain desperation just to reach out and share my story with somebody, I guess, to make it easier, to lighten it, that kind of need only creates more of the same, that kind of fear. And I was coming from a place of acute fear. And so what was mirrored to me was people being repelled by that, I guess. And equally, it's just as likely that had I made a connection with anybody during that first period of time, that they would have similarly been coming from a place of need, because like attracts like. And so it got me, really, it brought me to an awareness that no matter what, the best thing we can ever do for ourselves is to meet ourselves first, to be, as I've said many times, to be our own best friend, to meet our emotions and not deny them. And I don't think I fully understand or understood at the time that this was actually triggering aspects of my construct. I simply knew that I was very scared and overwhelmed. And interestingly enough, as I started to become more present to things and I did things that really benefited myself, I started to make friends in that community, and I still have friends within that same community to this day, even living across the world as I now do. So it's one of the first lessons to be your own best friend and to be present to what you are experiencing, the emotions that you're experiencing. So another one of the things I learned during that time, which was really beneficial, is that overmanagement system of the brain where, you wake up and your mind's just running the program immediately, that you hardly have even caught your breath and woken to the day. I learned to carve out a little bit of space for myself each morning. And it was really, I think, a process of almost meditation, but it wasn't consciously done for that. It was just simply at night before I went to bed, and this is really helpful. I wrote down everything on a little notebook I kept next to the bed, everything that was, you know, on my mind, anything that I had to deal with, anything at all that came to me. I just jotted down in note form. And then I told myself, okay, now I can do nothing else about this now. There's nothing whatsoever that is going to be helped by me overrunning these thoughts. And so I learned not to. When they came up in my mind, I would observe them. And at first it felt like trying to push them down, but I learned not to do that and just to let them drift past, not to engage with them. And in time, they stopped coming up so often. And so I carved out some time to sleep, which was obviously really important. And in the morning, I had the exact time it took to make and drink a cup of tea before I would start thinking about anything at all to do with the day. And my kids knew also that that was my time. I would sit in bed and just quietly be before the day began, and then I would deal with whatever. So that little bit of meditation space or space for me was hugely helpful. One of the other things I learned is that feeling as overwhelmed as I did, I was actually repelling what help was there. And I didn't realize it. It didn't look like that to me. And for sure, I felt like I would be really grateful for help. But there was a kind of panic to my actions that made it very tough for people to approach me and actually to be accepted when they offered to help. So I will say, first of all, that when people offer you help, it isn't always the help you think you need. But watch yourself, like observe yourself, and be aware of the fact that you're in a state that is almost defensive and you may not be seeing very clearly. And so take the help that's offered if you can. Take whatever is offered. Now, I can think of one person in particular, and for the most part, all he could really do for me at that time was, help with dishes or cook a meal or listen to me, just listen to me. Now, he might not have been able to offer substantive advice about my situation, and he didn't necessarily have an opinion. And rather than to turn down the offer of help because it wasn't what I thought I needed, I actually learned to just accept what was on offer, and it was very valuable. And that's true of anybody offering to help. So the most important part of being able to give is actually being able to receive. It's to be open. So I know that's not easy when you're feeling under siege or you're dealing with something major in your life, but it will benefit you, and it will change what you draw to you if you are able to just open up a little bit, loosen up just a bit, and take what's on offer. Presence, I've talked about that too, but this was something else that made an enormous difference to the experience that I had at the time, was to be able to be present to what my thought patterns and my feelings were, and to learn not to engage with them so much. So broadly speaking, a process of almost mindfulness during that time. Not to identify with these stories, because one of the things that made this whole episode so difficult is partly that I blamed myself for the situation that we were in, although I don't think it was my fault, but nevertheless at the time I felt I should have somehow prevented what was happening. I should have made better decisions or been more aware. But not just that. I think that there was the tendency to just to make it personal, to make everything that was happening very personal. And so when there was a part of this whole story where the representative of one of the people that I was engaged with in this legal battle, and I can't talk about it fully because there is a non-disclosure agreement in place with regard to this, but that they hired Scotland's biggest loss adjuster to come and try and pick holes in my argument, because I was really presenting my own legal arguments for almost a year. And I remember that I was feeling attacked. I was feeling as if it was personal. And I'll tell you that really nothing that happens outside of you is personal. Everything is a reflection of what's going on inside you. But usually that's true of, well, not usually, always that's true of other people too. So it's a reflection of what they're expressing is a reflection of what's going on inside them. And so just the ability to depersonalize it. I know that the story, our own story, is often triggered in these situations, but it is valuable to know that, in fact, though that may be the case, that is not actually that may be the case, that's what you're feeling, but that isn't what's actually happening. If that makes any sense. So to be aware that it's not personal, to be able to bring presence to your emotions and your thoughts, to give yourself time not to be thinking all the time, to accept help when offered, and to be aware of your energy during times like this. And all of those things were acquired during that time. And I think that it's given me a greater calm. Having come through that all these years later, I feel that I have the ability to, I notice that when something happens now, at the very least, I'm not as quick to react. I watch it, and frequently I react. If I react at all rather than respond, I consider my response, let's say. And I'm very aware of what my story has been and is. And so if that shows up, I give myself some time just to breathe and to feel into what's being triggered in this, rather than to just go for it, you know? There was a story my daughter told me today about being out, and she was getting some food, and there was a woman there as well at this, food place, and the woman lost her temper with the people working there. According to my daughter, it was just, they'd done nothing wrong, but she wasn't happy with some aspect of the pricing to do with something, and she got a little rude with the people working behind the counter, and she said something, let's say, racially insulting to them, and just generally impatient and rude. And my daughter then commented about this and said, that's very rude, and you should consider that they're really busy at this time of year. And the woman slapped my daughter in the face. And I mean, my daughter reacted. She did. She reacted very quickly. She threw her drink on her. Guess she felt she needed cooling off. It's interesting what these stories reflect. We're all coming from them, right? We're all coming from some kind of construct. And what would a moment or two to breathe into what we're feeling? No doubt that woman had had a day. No doubt there were things going on in her life. She didn't feel that what she was seeing represented her expectations or fairness. But if she'd taken a step back and considered it, what might she have done? What would my daughter have done as well, similarly? She's a bit of a warrior, that one. So I leave you on that note. I hope that the noise of the traffic hasn't been too bad, but I just needed to get out and get a cup of coffee, and this was really the best light that I could find. I hope you have a very good week, and please send your stories in to me. I always enjoy reading them. Thank you to those who have done so already. And if I can offer something, I absolutely will.